Think traveling to the United States is simple. Just get a visa, book a flight, and you're in. That's exactly what thousands of people believed, right before they were sent back home within hours. Because here's the truth. No one tells you clearly. A United States visa does not guarantee entry, not even close. The moment you land, your trip is no longer in your control. It's in the hands of a border officer who has the authority to decide your future in just a few minutes. And that decision can be based on something as small as how you answer a question. Let that sink in. You could spend months preparing, saving money, planning everything perfectly, and still be denied entry because of one detail you didn't think mattered. And the scariest part? Most people who get denied never saw it coming. They thought they did everything right. They followed the rules. They had their documents. But they didn't understand how the system actually works. When you arrive in the United States, you are not treated like a tourist yet. You are treated like a potential risk. Every traveler is. The officer standing in front of you is trained to look for inconsistencies, hesitation, anything that doesn't add up. And they don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They don't need a long investigation. They just need a reason to doubt your story. And once that doubt appears, everything changes. Let's break this down in the way most people never think about. Imagine you're asked a simple question. What is the purpose of your visit? Seems easy, right? Most people answer quickly. Tourism. But what if the officer asks a follow-up question? Where exactly are you going? Now you hesitate. Not because you're lying, but because you didn't prepare. That small hesitation can be interpreted as uncertainty. Then they ask, how long will you stay? Your answer doesn't match your return ticket exactly. Another small inconsistency. Then they ask, who are you traveling with? You mention a friend, but you don't have clear details about that person. At this point, a pattern begins to form, not in your mind, but in theirs. And that's when you may be sent to what's called secondary inspection. This is where things become very different from what you imagined. You are taken to a separate area. You may have to wait for hours. You don't have access to your phone. You can't freely contact anyone. And you don't know how long this will take or what the outcome will be. For many people, this is the moment reality hits. Because now it's no longer a quick conversation. It's a deeper examination. Officers may go through your belongings more carefully. They may ask you the same questions again, in different ways, to see if your answers stay consistent. And here's something that, honestly, shocks most travelers. They can check your phone, your private messages, your emails, your social media, not because you did something wrong, but just because they want to verify your story. If you told them you're visiting for tourism, but your messages show you talking about job opportunities, or staying longer, or maybe meeting someone you didn't mention, that's enough to raise some serious concerns. And once those concerns are raised, it becomes very difficult to convince them otherwise. Many people think they can explain things if there's a misunderstanding. But at the border, things don't work like in normal life. You don't get unlimited time to clarify. You don't get the benefit of the doubt in the way you might expect. The officer's job is not to prove you're guilty. It's to decide whether they trust you enough to let you in. And if that trust is broken, even slightly, the outcome can be immediate. You may be told that you are not admissible, that your entry is denied. And then comes the part that feels unreal. You are placed on a return flight, often the next available one, back to where you came from. No vacation, no second chance. Just a sudden end to your entire plan. And here's what makes it even more frustrating. Many of these situations could have been avoided, not by doing something complicated, but by understanding how the system thinks. Because this isn't just about rules. It's about perception. It's about consistency. It's about whether your story makes sense from the outside. For example, if you say you're visiting for 2 weeks, but you're carrying documents that suggest long-term plans, that creates a conflict. If you say you're a tourist, but you don't have a clear itinerary, that creates doubt. If you say you're staying with a friend, but you can't provide basic details about them, that creates suspicion. None of these things alone guarantee denial, but together they build a picture. And that picture is what the officer uses to make a decision. Now let's talk about something even deeper, something most people completely overlook. At the border, your rights are not the same as inside the country. This is not a courtroom. This is not a situation where you can argue your case for hours or demand specific protections. The officer has broad authority. They can make decisions quickly, and those decisions are extremely hard to challenge in that moment. That's why mindset matters more than people realize. If you treat the process casually, like it's just a formality, you are already at a disadvantage. Because for the officer, this is not casual at all. This is their job. Their responsibility is to protect the border. And they are trained to be cautious, not optimistic. That means they are more likely to question things that don't fully make sense than to give you the benefit of the doubt. And this is where many travelers unknowingly make a critical mistake. They underestimate the seriousness of the questions. They give vague answers. They improvise. They assume honesty alone is enough. But honesty without clarity can still create doubt. And doubt is what leads to deeper inspection. Once you understand this, everything starts to look different. You realize that every detail matters. Not in a paranoid way, but in a structured way. Your answers should be clear, consistent, and aligned with your documents. Your story should make sense not just to you, but to someone hearing it for the first time under pressure. Because that's exactly the situation you're in. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The system is not designed to be forgiving. It's designed to filter. It's designed to identify risk, even if that risk is only a possibility. That's why even small issues can have big consequences. And that's why preparation is not optional. It's essential. Now imagine this scenario. You've been planning this trip for months. You arrive at the airport excited, maybe a little tired from the long flight. You step up to the counter, expecting a routine process. But within minutes, the tone changes. The questions become sharper. The officer's expression becomes more serious. You start to feel pressure. And under pressure, even simple questions can become difficult. You might forget details. You might answer too quickly or too slowly. And each of those reactions can be interpreted in ways you didn't intend. This is not about scaring you. It's about showing you the reality that most people only discover when it's too late. Because once the process starts going in the wrong direction, it's very hard to reverse it. That's why the best strategy is not to fix problems later. It's to avoid creating them in the first place. And that starts with awareness. Understanding what officers are looking for. Understanding how your answers are perceived. Understanding that this is not just a conversation, it's an evaluation. And you are being evaluated from the moment you step forward. Now here's where things become even more serious. Because what happens next is something most travelers never prepare for. Once you are in secondary inspection, the situation is no longer just about answering questions correctly. It becomes about whether your entire story holds together under pressure. Officers may ask you the same question multiple times, but in slightly different ways. Not because they didn't hear you, but because they are testing consistency. And consistency is everything. If your answers change, even slightly, it creates a signal. Not necessarily that you're lying, but that something isn't stable. And instability is enough to raise concern. Imagine being asked, "How long will you stay?" You say, 2 weeks. Later they ask again, "When is your return flight?" You hesitate, then say a date that doesn't perfectly align. That small gap becomes a problem. Or they ask, "What places will you visit?" You give a general answer at first, but later mention a different city you didn't include earlier. Again, not a lie, but from their perspective, it's inconsistent. And at the border, consistency is often more important than intention, because they don't have time to understand your full story in depth. They rely on patterns, signals, and quick judgments. Now let's talk about something that makes this even more intense: digital evidence. Your phone is no longer just your personal device. It can become part of the inspection. Officers may look for anything that supports or contradicts what you said. Conversations about work, plans that go beyond your stated purpose, messages that suggest something different from what you declared. Even casual messages, taken out of context, can raise questions. And here's the key issue. You don't get to explain everything in detail the way you would in a normal conversation. The process is fast, focused, and based on what they see in the moment. If something looks questionable, it may be treated as a risk. And once risk is identified, the system shifts toward caution. This is why so many people feel shocked by the outcome. They think, "But I didn't do anything wrong." And that may be true. But at the border, the question is not just whether you did something wrong. It's whether the officer is confident enough that you won't. That's a very different standard. And it's a much harder one to meet if you're unprepared. Now consider another factor: behavior. Not just what you say, but how you say it. If you appear overly nervous, that can be interpreted as hiding something. If you appear too relaxed or dismissive, that can be seen as not taking the process seriously. If you become defensive when questioned, that can escalate the situation quickly. So what's the right approach? Calm, clear, and consistent. But that's easier said than done when you're under pressure, tired from travel, and unsure of what's happening next. This is why mental preparation matters just as much as documents. You need to know your own story clearly. You need to be able to explain it simply, without hesitation. Not memorized like a script, but understood well enough that it stays consistent no matter how the question is asked. Now let's look at something even more important: the idea of intent. At the border, officers are trying to understand your intent. Why are you really here? Not just the surface answer, but the deeper purpose. And intent is not always obvious. It's inferred from your answers, your documents, your behavior, and sometimes even your digital footprint. If all of these align, your entry is usually smooth, but if they don't, even slightly, that's when things become complicated. For example, if your profile suggests you might want to stay longer than allowed or work without authorization, that becomes a concern. Even if you never plan to do that, the system is designed to prevent potential violations, not just respond to actual ones. That's why it can feel strict, even unfair, to some travelers. But from the system's perspective, it's about risk management. And that brings us to one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire process. You are not being judged as a person. You are being evaluated as a potential risk. That's a very different lens. It's not about whether you're good or bad. It's about whether your situation creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is what the system tries to minimize. Now imagine reaching the final stage of this process. After hours of waiting, questioning, and uncertainty, a decision is made. You are called forward. The officer looks at you and says, "We are unable to admit you at this time." That's it. No long explanation. No debate. Just a final decision. And in that moment, everything changes. Your plans, your expectations, your entire trip, all of it ends right there. You may feel confused, frustrated, even shocked. Because from your perspective, nothing you did seemed serious enough to cause this outcome. But from their perspective, the risk was not low enough to allow entry. And that difference in perspective is what catches people off guard. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Why does this happen so often? Because people prepare for the trip, but not for the process. They think about flights, hotels, places to visit, but they don't think about how to present their purpose clearly. They don't think about how their answers will be interpreted. They don't think about how small inconsistencies can add up. And that gap in preparation is where problems begin. The truth is, entering the United States is not just about meeting requirements on paper. It's about passing a real-time evaluation under pressure. And that requires a different kind of readiness. Not fear, but awareness. Not perfection, but clarity. If you understand that, you're already ahead of most travelers. Because you're not just hoping things go smoothly. You're making it more likely that they will. And here's the final thing you need to remember. This entire process can feel unpredictable from the outside, but from the inside, it follows a logic, a structure, a set of priorities. If your story is clear, consistent, and aligned with your documents, your chances improve significantly. If it's not, even small issues can become big ones. So before you travel, ask yourself a simple question. If someone who knows nothing about me had to understand my purpose in a few minutes, would it make complete sense? If the answer is yes, you're on the right track. If not, that's where you need to focus. Because in the end, this is not about luck. It's not about hoping the officer is in a good mood. It's about whether your situation makes sense under scrutiny. And if it doesn't, you may never make it past the airport. That's the reality most people don't see until it's too late.